go. I'm going to demo a coil built piece for you guys. You're going to work on coils while you're doing your at-home hybrid instruction. Students in class are going to continue working on projects. While you're at home, you're going to be working on projects there too, just a different style. Okay. Nice thing about coil building is you need minimal tools, you need minimal equipment. You can get by with a fork, a kitchen sponge, and a bag of clay. That's really all you need. Okay, so I'm going to start us out here, and I'm going to go pretty slow to make sure that it's in depth. So when you're watching this video, if you want to follow along with what I'm doing while you're making, that might not be a bad idea. You can pause as you go. A couple things that I would have, I've got my bag obviously of clay. When I'm not using this, I need to make sure that I've got this wrapped up always. Okay, so whatever bag you're using, make sure to wrap that up. You are going to want something to score with. Like I said, a fork would work just fine. I've got one of these ribs here with the serrated edge. You could use a hair comb, plastic hair comb, or if you've got like a hair pick, you could use something like that. Anything that has lots of teeth or prongs of some kind that you can score into the surface of the clay would work fine. Okay, and a sponge of some kind would be ideal. Which I don't know where mine went, but I've got one here. And that's really about it, okay? Some things to be helpful would be a damp rag that you can keep with you to wipe your hands. If you get clay on your hands, you need to clean them off. And also, you guys are going to be working at home, so I don't want your parents giving me a call or an email angry because you made a mess. So having a damp towel is nice because you can do a quick wipe down if you get clay dust or clay bits. It's easy to clean up. Don't let the stuff get on the floor. It tracks through the house. Try to be clean, okay? The first thing that I want you guys to do is you're going to take out a little chunk of clay. Doesn't need to be very big. About the size of a clementine would be enough. And I'm going to have you sort of paddle out a slab. So I start by getting into a ball shape. Then I pancake that in my hands. And then I can do the stretch throw. You want to paddle that out till it's about 1/4 of an inch. Once it's 1/4 of an inch thick, then you're pretty good. Okay? Now, you could use any sort of household item that you can find to cut out the circle of this. If you got a cup close by, you could take your cup, you could lay it down on top of there, and again, any household knife or anything like that would work just fine. If you got an X-Acto knife that you can use at home, that would work well too. And you can go ahead and cut out your circle. Now, as far as work surfaces, okay, I've got a regular countertop. For mica countertop, I've got this concrete board here, which is something that's kind of like the plaster table. We actually have these in the room. And I've got a surface here that I'll build on just so I can move this while you're looking. But when you're rolling your coils, if they're too wet and you're working on, say, a tabletop that's wooden, or if you're working on a countertop, sometimes they'll get stuck. But I think our clay is dry enough that it shouldn't be an issue. And so right now I can roll these coils without much problem. I don't have any clay sticking. It's good, okay? If you wanted to roll on like a wooden cutting board, that would be okay. This thing would kind of be the same as like a wooden cutting board because this would draw moisture out of the clay and it's going to dry it out. So you really don't want your slab or your coils to get dry while you're working. So a countertop would be best, or a tabletop that you can clean up easy when you're done would be best. But wooden cutting boards, things like that will work as well. Okay. The other thing that you should do when you're working is whatever you're going to work on, you should put a little piece of paper towel down of some kind, just so that it releases off the surface easy. If it's just your tabletop and you're working right there, again, little paper towel will help that release. I've got some bats here somewhere that I'll use. They walked off on me. I need a small one. That's weird, you guys. Very weird. Where did my baby bats go? Might have to edit this out of the video. And I'll work right on the bat. It'll be fine. Alright, so I've got my coil, or my slab started. I'm going to start rolling out a coil. This one might not be long enough for my first coil, so I need to make one a little bit bigger. I need to grab more clay. Now again, if your clay is a little bit on the sticky side, it might stick to your table, but if you have that wooden cutting board or something like that, or if you had a butcher block countertop, you could put this down on the butcher block countertop and just flatten it out for about 5 minutes, and that will dry some of that moisture out of the clay so that it doesn't stick. So for this piece, obviously this is my base, so I'm going to start building up on top of this base. My first couple coils, I'm just going to roll, or I'm just going to attach straight up. So I've got kind of a nice lift underneath my bowl. So I'm going to try to roll out enough coil that I can wrap it around a couple times. And when you guys do your coils, I want you to try to get them to be about somewhere in between 1/4 of an inch and 1/2 of an inch thick. So this thing's getting pretty long. I might split it in half. Come back to that one later. Some coil rolling technique that will be helpful. A lot of beginners make the mistake of they roll too quickly, like this, and they end up with a flat spot in their coil. Okay? So if you start to feel a flat spot forming, push down a little bit on that, get that flat spot to go away, and then continue rolling. Okay? I also don't use my entire hand. I'm really only using this part of my hand right here, mostly my middle finger. So I'm pushing down my middle finger and I'm rolling all the way back and all the way forward. And your goal is to get it as evenly rolled as possible so that it's the same thickness all the way through. Okay, so I'm ready to go ahead and attach this first one here, and I'm going to cut off a little bit off the end, but I'm going to cut it off at an angle. I'm not going to cut it straight through. I'm going to take my wet sponge and I'm just going to wet the surface of my clay where it's going to attach, and I'm going to take my scoring tool, whether it be a fork or a comb or whatever your preference is. I'm just going to cut this a little straighter. So I'm going to get this wet, score, and I'm going to get the surface of this coil wet and do the same thing. So I've got this little angle here. I'm actually going to turn this upside down. I'm going to just wet the surface. I don't need so much water that is dripping, just enough to get it wet. and then I'm going to score. And I'm going to take this, and I'm try to scoot this in so you guys can see it a little closer. As I push this down into my slab, I have to push every inch of this coil down and make sure that it's nice and secured. Now when I get to my overlap, I'm going to cut the opposite angle. So you can see how this angle here is cut this way. I'm going to do the opposite here so they line up nicely together. I'm going to wet and score that. And then make sure that they overlap nicely and blend that overlap out just a little bit. Okay? So now I'm going to go back and just push everything down nice and firm, make sure that I've got a good connection. And now I can move on to my next one. So I'm going to take my damp sponge, I'm just going to wet the surface of this coil, and I'm going to rib it like that. I've got one already ready to go because I rolled it long enough. So I'm going to go ahead and pinch this one. Now I'm going to pinch this one straight down on top because I want the bottom of this bowl to come straight up just a little bit, about 2 coils tall. And then same thing, I'm going to cut. I didn't cut it quite short enough. Now, I don't want to promote being sloppy, but if you mess up or something's not as perfect as you want it to be right now, it's okay because you're gonna refine these things as you go. Your sole goal here is to make sure that you just have a good connection. You got good scoring, you're using a little pressure to get this connected, blend out those seams, and you're good, okay? The other thing you don't want to do is you do not want to attach your seams all in the same spot. So my first seam is here, and my second seam was over here, and I'll put my third seam somewhere new. Okay? My hands are getting a little chalky, so I'm just going to take my damp sponge and do kind of a quick cleanup so my mom and dad are happy that I didn't make a mess in their kitchen or wherever I happen to be working. And I should get a dry towel. Alright, so this one is not quite long enough, but if I piece it together, that should be okay. So again, I'm going to wet the surface of this, score, wet the surface of this one, and score. Now, I do want this to start flaring out a little bit because it's going to be a bowl. But I'm still going to put this coil straight down on top, and I will show you how, that was actually pretty close. I'll show you how I start stretching it open. So I'm just making a little piece there, get it a little wet, score, and then attach a piece to finish it off. That's close. So what the water and the scoring is doing is the water's making the clay a little bit sticky. So it's helping hold together immediately because it's wet and sticky. What the scoring does, it kind of lines up all the grooves of the clay and kind of puts them together like this. And then as that clay starts to dry, those things all start to solidify. And so you just want to make sure that you've done that good. A lot of beginners like to skip that step and it comes back to haunt them because their pieces fall apart. So don't skip that step, okay? All right. In order to get this to start flaring out a little bit, what I want to do is I'm going to start pinching this coil and stretching this top one out. So when you make things with coils, if I pinch them like a pinch pot, the diameter opens up. So you can start with a cylinder and start pinching it, and that diameter opens up. And so I want to just start opening this top one up a little bit, so I'm pinching, and I'm trying to pinch every little edge. And that starts, now it's starting to open up, and I can do it one more time and see if I can get that to go a little bit more. Okay, so you can see that's already starting to flare out a little bit. All right, I'm going to pause, reset the video, and I'm going to show you the next step. All right, we're right back here for the next step. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better. Get a little autofocus there, perfect. All right, so the next step is you're going to need to smooth out all these coils so it doesn't look like you have coils built there at all, okay? In order to do this, you can pretty much just take your fingertip and you can stretch the clay into itself to blend that out. So I'll try to do it so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm just pulling this clay down with my fingertip. It's still pretty wet clay. It hasn't dried much. Now, if you've got a tool, you could do this with a tool of some kind. If you brought a tool home from school, you could do it with that. If you've got like a wooden spoon or a metal spoon or a wooden spoon, might work okay. But really, I just find that your fingertip is really the best. And it doesn't really matter if you go down or if you pull up, just so long as that you're smoothing out that surface. And I'm going to do the same to the outside. So my outside right now needs to be smoothed out as well. Sometimes you'll make kind of a mess on the surface if your clay is a little too dry, or I'm sorry, a little too wet. Mine's a little bit wet and sticky right now, so it's not really really blending well. I'm kind of just making more of a mess on the surface. And so I think I might stop, and I'll come back to it once it's a little bit drier. Alright, so now I'm ready to start moving on to my next one. I'm going to score the surface. I should have got it wet first. Get it wet. And score. And remember, as you're working, anytime you've got these little chunks of clay sitting out, make sure right away to get them balled back up so they don't dry out any faster. Get them under your plastic maybe. My studio actually in my house is downstairs in the basement underneath the garage. So it's all concrete. There's no airflow in here and it's cold. So nothing dries out in my studio. It takes days for things to dry out. So I can leave my stuff out and not have it be an issue. But if you're sitting at home and the heat's on in the house, your work might dry out pretty fast. Alright, going with my next one. So you can see I've only been doing this for about 20 minutes and I'm already on my fourth coil. So you can build pretty quickly by this method and really increase the size of things pretty quickly. And you probably couldn't make things this big on the wheel. So that's kind of the nice thing about coil building, is it allows you to work a little bit larger than you would otherwise. Now again, I placed this coil kind of straight on top of the one that I had, and when I pinch it, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. So I'm going to blend this inside in first. Sort of overlap those coils by blending. And then pinch. And as I pinch, this is going to stretch. Okay, so now I'm about four coils in, and I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep stretching this thing out. But one thing you might notice is that your clay sometimes will get a little bit too soft for you to add more coils. Like you'll notice that it's starting to get too flimsy or it's getting too big. So if you've got a blow dryer at home, you can borrow one from the bathroom. You could use a blow dryer on high to cool it down, or I'm sorry, dry it out a little bit. I've got a blowtorch that I use when I need to do that, but you cannot use one of these in your house. When you're using that blow dryer, it's important to make sure that you're always moving the dryer or your piece to make sure you're not drying one place too much. So now I've got the perfect consistency to smooth out the outside, because my outside was getting a little too messy. And it won't take long. This thing's already pretty stiff on the outside. It's not very sticky anymore. It's warm, it's not hot. I didn't heat it up that much. Okay, so I'm ready for my next one. So I'm going to teach you a little trick here to help speed you up in your building process. So I'm going to roll this coil, and I'm going to keep it a little bit on the thick side. Just make sure you can see me good here. Yeah, it's perfect. I need to refocus though. All right. So I'm intentionally rolling this one out a little bit thicker. I'm not going to roll it out as thin as those other ones. When I'm rolling coils too, I always start in the middle of the coil and I work my way out to the end. Then I go back to the middle, go the other way. And then I look for the areas where it's inconsistent and try to even them out a little bit. And then I'll go back to the middle and do the same thing, okay? All right, so now, here's how you can speed yourself up. I left this coil way thicker than the thickness of my walls. I'm going to flatten it out just with my hand until it is the same thickness as my walls. So my walls are a little thicker than 1/4 inch. I want this to be a little thicker than 1/4 inch. But be careful, because if you're doing this on a countertop, it might get stuck. If you're doing this on a wooden board, it'll be fine. But it could get stuck to your countertop if you do this too much. So make sure to flip it. And it should be good. Stretch it a little bit. Alright, so this one I'm going to attach on the top, and it's going to make this go larger faster. Get this on there. There we go. So, like I've been doing, get the top wet, score. Now for this one, I'm getting this part wet, right here, and scoring. And again, when I attach this, I'm kind of attaching it a little bit more vertical than I want it to end up. And as I stretch it, I can stretch it wider. In fact, I do need to go a little wider for this one. It was a little too vertical. Okay, so now my overlap here, I'm going to cut a little bit different since it's a tall coil. I'm not going to cut it down this way. I'm going to cut it like that. And then this one I'm going to cut the opposite angle like that. And again, get these wet. Not dripping wet, just dampen the surface. Score with your whatever tool you're using and overlap. And then this overlap, again, I'm always going to smooth that out and try to hide that seam. Alright, now I'm going to blend that down into my previous coil. And blend the inside down. I'll do this so you can see it. So I don't expect your first go you to get quite this far. You might have some issues you got to work through. But if you can get 3 or 4 coils done in the first sitting, that would be good. As you go, you're going to get better and better. And so these projects are actually going to end up pretty large. I want them to be, 10 or 12 inches tall, or at least in diameter. They might be this big, good sized serving bowl when you're done. Now, you guys all have ribs at school, these flexible metal ones. At some point in time, you're going to need to bring it home, and you're going to use this to smooth out the surface of the clay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to support the inside of it, and I'm going to draw this rib over the surface of the clay to smooth it out. And that's going to give me a nice finished surface. And any fingerprints that were left or any crumbs that were in there, you try to get rid of. Alright, now I'm going to stretch this again by pinching. So that it's a little bit wider. I'm being spied on. Make sure it's nice and round. And I think I'll do one more. How much time I got? I got 6 minutes. Plenty of time to do one more. So my goal for you guys is you're going to be working kind of side by side with me on video. You can use this to help you along. Watch it as you go. We're going to stay logged into the meeting, and you will just holler if you have a question, okay? Because I'm going to be working around the room, and I'll have the computer on, and so if you need me, just yell into the thing so that I hear you, because I might not be checking all the time. And you can just show me with your Chromebook like what it looks like, where you're at, what you're struggling with, and I'll give you some feedback. Okay, again, I've made this coil a little bit thick. I'm going to paddle it out till it's the same thickness as my walls. I don't want it to get stuck on my countertop. And again, just wet the surface. Score it. Wet the surface of my coil. Oops, that's not my sponge. And so, I've got a little challenge for you guys. Hopefully you've watched the whole video. I am going to offer up a piece of my own work to whichever student can make the largest coiled piece. So that means you may need to bring more clay home. I mean, we're going to have about 10 pounds to start with. So if you need to bring more clay, by all means, bring more clay. And I will give something of mine to whoever can make the biggest piece. Which might mean that you have to make your walls relatively thin. If they're too thick, you're going to end up using up too much clay. And part of that requirement too is that you get your work back to school in one piece. Alright, so I'm actually going to pause there because I've got 3 minutes left. And I just want to talk about wrapping these things up. Okay, so as you've been working, if you build something as big as this, it's going to be a little soft and flimsy. That's not great if I keep on going taller. And I'm going to really widen this thing out too in my next video. So I need to let this dry a little bit. Down here in my studio, if I just leave it like this, soft clay, it'll be kind of a soft leather hard by the morning. So usually I throw pots about this time and I just leave them and I come back the next day after school or something and they're about ready to take off the bats. But this thing, if I'm getting up in the morning tomorrow, Saturday, it's not going to be that dry. So I can just leave it out. For you guys at your house, you're definitely going to want to like take a garbage bag and cut it up. Or take a plastic shopping bag and maybe just cover it loosely like this, okay? If you tuck all the edges, it's not going to dry out at all. But if you just kind of place your plastic over the top of it, it should dry out a little bit. And then for the next day, it's stiff enough that you could start attaching more coils. Okay? I'm going to keep adding videos as we go and just kind of film as class goes. But that's the start of your coil piece. Good luck. And I'll see you when you're in class.